The story of Caligula begins not with the chaos that would define his reign, but with the shadowed corridors of power in Rome, where ambition, betrayal, and intrigue coursed like blood through the veins of the empire. Born Gaius Julius Caesar, Augustus Germanicus in the year 12th CE, he entered the world under the watchful eyes of a dynasty marked by both glory and danger. His father, Germanicus, was a celebrated general, admired by soldiers and citizens alike, and his mother, Agrippina the Elder, descended from the lineage of Augustus, Rome's first emperor. From the start, Gaius was thrust into the currents of history, a child whose laughter on the streets of Rome earned him the nickname Caligula, meaning little boots, for the miniature military attire he wore alongside his father's legions. Yet behind this playful moniker lay the heavy weight of expectation. Rome demanded greatness, and from birth Caligula's path was shadowed by the complex interplay of public adoration and political peril. As a young boy, Caligula witnessed the precarious nature of life among the imperial family. His father, Germanicus, was beloved, yet his rising popularity threatened the reigning emperor Tiberius. Germanicus's mysterious death in 19 CE, far from Rome, left the family vulnerable. Caligula, still a child, returned to the capital under the watchful, calculating eyes of Tiberius, an emperor whose paranoia was legendary. The court whispered of poison, subtle manipulations, and quiet deaths, and in this climate, Caligula grew up steeped in both reverence and fear. The traumas of his youth, historians suggest, may have planted the seeds of both brilliance and madness. He observed firsthand how power could be both intoxicating and lethal, how loyalty could shift like sand, and how the mechanisms of control in Rome could crush or elevate with equal caprice. Even as a young man, he displayed both charm and cunning, traits that would later define and undo his reign. When Tiberius finally named Caligula as his heir in 31 CE, after years of careful political maneuvering, it seemed a triumph of destiny. The emperor, known for his cruelty and suspicion, took Caligula under his direct supervision, ostensibly as preparation for leadership, yet with a vigilance that suggested he saw in the young man both potential and peril. Caligula's early years under Tiberius were a delicate dance. He learned the arts of governance, public performance, and political manipulation while observing the emperor's darker tendencies. Ancient sources depict him as both intelligent and theatrical, adept at public ceremonies, yet capable of profound calculation behind closed doors. It was a duality that would later define his rule, a combination of captivating spectacle and terrifying unpredictability. By the time he ascended to the throne in 37 CE, the young emperor was both a product of his lineage and the complex, often toxic environment that shaped him. Caligula's early months as emperor were met with overwhelming enthusiasm. The citizens of Rome, weary of Tiberius's fearsome reign, hailed the new ruler with ecstatic jubilation. He opened the treasury, distributed largesse, and restored a sense of civic vitality that had languished under his predecessor. For a time, Caligula appeared the ideal emperor, generous, charismatic, and attuned to the populace's desires. But beneath the surface, his reign began to reveal the seeds of volatility. Reports from historians, though often sensationalized, describe a swift descent into behavior that would shock both contemporaries and posterity. The emperor, who had once charmed the masses, began to indulge in extravagant displays, cruelty, and capricious acts of violence. Scholars debate the origins of this transformation, with some suggesting illness, perhaps a severe fever, as a trigger, while others point to the intoxicating power that allowed latent impulses to manifest unchecked. What is certain is that Caligula's rule would come to embody both the grandeur and the horror of absolute authority, a reign where the boundaries of decency and terror were constantly tested. Rome itself, vast and complex, became a theater for Caligula's ambitions and excesses. He reveled in spectacles, commissioning grand games and performances that demonstrated not only wealth, but divine association. Ancient accounts describe him declaring himself a living god, demanding temples and statues in his honor, and expecting rituals of reverence that blurred the lines between emperor and deity. Political rivals, senators, and even members of his own family were not immune to his whims, facing exile, execution, or public humiliation. Some of his decisions, seemingly absurd or cruel, also carried strategic undertones. The historian must consider the context of a ruler who navigated an empire fraught with treachery and political tension. In his extremes, Caligula personified the perilous edge of autocracy. Unchecked power magnified both genius and madness, charisma and terror intertwined in a volatile, unpredictable dance. The streets of Rome, the halls of the Senate, and the palaces of the elite all bore witness to the unpredictable rhythm of his rule, a world where wonder and horror could appear in equal measure. As the years progressed, Caligula's excesses became increasingly elaborate and personal. He commissioned lavish constructions, some monumental and public, others more private and intimate, demonstrating an obsession with legacy, spectacle, and self-aggrandizement. The emperor's relationships were equally complex, marked by alliances, betrayals, and apparent manipulations of intimacy for political leverage. Stories of sexual impropriety, cruelty, and irrational orders circulated with a mixture of fear and fascination, amplified by the rhetoric of senators and later historians. Yet beneath these sensationalized accounts, there was an enduring question of motive. Were these actions driven solely by madness or by a calculated, if extreme, understanding of power dynamics? In examining Caligula's reign, one must navigate the tension between historical record and legend, recognizing the ways in which perception, propaganda, and fear shaped the narrative of Rome's mad emperor. His story, therefore, is as much a reflection of the anxieties and obsessions of his time as it is a chronicle of his personal pathologies. The consolidation of Caligula's authority also reflected the intricate balance between military power and political legitimacy. The army, a cornerstone of imperial stability, was treated with both generosity and theatricality. He granted bonuses, marched alongside troops, and engaged in campaigns that ranged from the ambitious to the absurd, including accounts of parading war trophies in bizarre ceremonies. These actions, while sometimes mocked by historians, illustrate a deliberate effort to command loyalty through spectacle, fear, and reward. The emperor's relationship with the Senate, however, was far more volatile. Senators accustomed to influence and protocol chafed under Caligula's unpredictable decrees and public humiliations. The tension between imperial absolutism and traditional senatorial authority reached dramatic extremes, contributing to a climate of suspicion and conspiracy. Within this environment, every interaction, every decision, every performance carried profound significance, demonstrating the delicate interplay between charisma, authority, and survival in the highest echelons of Roman power. By the midpoint of his reign, the duality of Caligula's persona had become starkly apparent. To the public, he could be mercurial, generous, and entertaining. To the elite, he could be ruthless, irrational, and terrifying. Ancient chroniclers, writing with the benefit of hindsight and often moralizing intent, painted him as the archetype of tyrannical excess. Modern scholars, however, emphasize the need for nuance, examining the psychological, social, and political pressures that shaped his conduct. Rome, an empire of staggering complexity, demanded constant negotiation between spectacle and governance, fear and favor, public performance and private calculation. Caligula's reign, in this light, becomes a lens through which to explore not only the life of one man, but the broader dynamics of imperial authority, human ambition, and the fragile boundaries between order and chaos. As the years of Caligula's reign advanced, the contours of his power became increasingly entwined with his personal eccentricities, revealing a ruler who wielded authority as both instrument and spectacle. The early adulation of Rome's populace had long since evolved into a complex web of fear, fascination, and resentment. Citizens and senators alike observed the emperor's actions with a mixture of awe and trepidation, never certain which gestures reflected strategic calculation and which arose from impulsive desire. Within the Palatine and Capitoline hills, the halls of power resounded with whispered conjecture and cautious obedience, for to misinterpret the emperor's moods could have fatal consequences. Caligula, in this environment, mastered the art of psychological dominance. He understood that power was as much a performance as a mandate, and that public perception could be shaped as effectively by spectacle as by law or force. His ability to manipulate this interplay allowed him to maintain authority even when his actions seemed capricious, his decrees absurd, or his personal conduct scandalous. It was a dangerous brilliance, a mastery of the theatre of governance that both enthralled and terrified. One of the most striking aspects of his rule was the extent to which he sought to dissolve the boundary between the divine and the imperial. Temples, statues, and ceremonies became instruments through which he asserted a godlike presence, demanding both psychological and ritual compliance. The Senate, already strained by years of humiliation, faced the intensification of the emperor's capricious cruelty. Subjected to public embarrassment, imprisonment, and execution, their traditional roles eroded by the unpredictable whims of imperial authority. Military loyalty, once a stabilizing force, was similarly tested by theatrical campaigns and symbolic spoils of victory, revealing the fragility of reliance on personal charisma rather than structural stability. Amid this climate, Caligula's personal life, marriages, and alliances further intertwined with politics, demonstrating that intimacy and authority were inseparable and that the emperor's volatility infused all aspects of Roman life with uncertainty. By the later years of his reign, the precarious balance between fear, loyalty, and spectacle had begun to fracture. Senators whispered, soldiers obeyed with caution, and citizens marveled at grand displays while noting the growing instability at the heart of the empire. Conspiracies began to coalesce within the Senate, the Praetorian Guard, and his household, recognizing that survival required decisive action. On a fateful day in 41 CE, the culmination of these forces struck with lethal precision. Caligula was assassinated in the Palatine. Stabbed by those who had once pledged loyalty, the instruments of his power turned against him. The city of Rome oscillated between relief, fear, and uncertainty. Citizens absorbed the sudden absence of a ruler whose extremes had dominated their lives, while the Praetorian Guard moved swiftly to elevate Claudius, demonstrating the resilience of the empire's institutions even amid violent upheaval. The legacy of Caligula is complex, woven from historical fact, rumor, and interpretation. He was simultaneously charismatic and cruel, visionary and impulsive, a ruler whose brilliance and madness were inseparable. His life illustrates the intoxicating potential of absolute authority and the profound dangers of concentrated power, revealing how personality, perception, and performance shape governance as much as law, bureaucracy, or military might. The empire endured, yet the lessons of his reign echoed through centuries, influencing subsequent emperors, political theorists, and the collective imagination. The story of Caligula, marked by grandeur, terror, and relentless unpredictability, endures as a vivid study of human ambition and the precarious balance between genius and madness, offering timeless insights into the nature of power, authority, and leadership itself.